Hi everyone, and welcome to Truth Over News. Last week, the House Oversight Committee announced that Biden's White House was obstructing a simple request to obtain draft copies of a speech that Joe Biden gave in Ukraine in December of 2015. The news was hardly noticed and completely ignored by corporate media, but it is still highly significant. For once, House Republicans had a good idea and actually followed up on their good idea. The fact that Biden and his people are fighting tooth and nail against such a routine disclosure is highly significant. But why is Biden's 2015 draft Ukraine speech so important, and why is Biden so determined not to let us see it? We investigate. On December 9th, 2015, then Vice President Joe Biden gave a speech in the Ukrainian parliament, which is called the Rada. We all know what he said because the speech was broadcast, and we can also look at the transcript. What the transcript reveals is that Biden demanded it was not enough to set up a new anti-corruption bureau and establish a special prosecutor fighting corruption, but that rather the office of the general prosecutor desperately needs reform. This is very important because a previous demand, which Ukraine fulfilled, had been to set up a new anti-corruption bureau and establish a special prosecutor. But suddenly, Biden was also demanding that the office of the general prosecutor, that means the office of Prosecutor General Victor Shokin, needed to be reformed. Well, at the time that Biden gave his speech, Victor Shokin just happens to have been investigating Burisma, Hunter Biden's corrupt energy firm. And Shokin also just happens to have later seized millions of dollars worth of property from Burisma's owner, Mykolai Zlochevsky. So the big question is whether the speech that Biden gave on December 9th, 2015, the one that seemingly out of the blue called for Shokin's office to be uprooted or reformed, was the same as the speech that Biden was initially supposed to give. Or was the part about Shokin added at the last minute? That's the big question, and that is the crux of the matter. And the White House has been fighting hard to conceal the answer to that question. Congress had sent a request for the original drafts of Biden's Ukraine speech to the National Archives and Records Administration. NARA then asked the White House whether they could release the draft to the House Oversight Committee. And that's where the White House said no, and they started to obstruct and delay. Significantly, NARA has confirmed that a full set of documents that cover this request exist. So there are original drafts of Biden's speech, it's just that he's not letting NARA hand them over. As a quick aside, NARA is the same organization whom Biden authorized to go after Trump with respect to the allegedly missing Mar-a-Lago documents. So it's more than a bit ironic that Biden is now pressuring NARA not to release documents. We have to infer from the fact that Biden is fighting this so hard that there are crucial differences between the original speech and the one that Biden ended up giving. If it was the same speech, surely they would have handed over the original draft already. So why is this so important? Well, if Biden added the part about Shokin at the last minute, then this would bring with it a number of very serious implications. That is because Biden's December 2015 trip to Ukraine was when he first demanded that Prosecutor General Shokin needed to be fired, and that, if he wasn't fired, Biden would withhold urgently needed loan guarantees. The media keeps parroting the lie that by the time Biden gave his Ukraine speech in December of 2015, it was already U.S. government policy to fire Shokin and to withhold loan guarantees. But that is simply not true. There was no U.S. policy to fire Prosecutor Shokin. In fact, U.S. government officials all expressed satisfaction with the job that Victor Shokin was doing. In late September of 2015, the U.S. ambassador in Ukraine, Jeffrey Pyatt, gave a big speech in Odessa in Ukraine, in which he said, and we quote, "We want to work with Prosecutor General Shokin so the Prosecutor General's office is leading the fight against corruption." And as for the loan guarantee, it was not U.S. government policy to withhold the guarantee, let alone to withhold it contingent on the prosecutor being fired. In fact, the exact opposite is true. It was U.S. government policy to release the loan guarantee quickly because Ukraine urgently needed it. It was Biden who single-handedly changed U.S. government policy. That's the giant elephant in the room with regard to the entire Ukraine-Biden corruption saga, and it is all documented in U.S. government records. Yet most of the public have no idea because they have been lied to by the media. Here's an example of such blatant lying. When Trump was about to be impeached for asking the president of Ukraine to help investigate Biden corruption, the Wall Street Journal claimed that Ambassador Pyatt had called Prosecutor Shokin an obstacle to anti-corruption efforts. But that is not what Pyatt said. As we just saw, Pyatt was happy with Shokin. What he was not happy with was the institution of the Office of Prosecutor General. Big difference. But the Wall Street Journal claimed that it was Shokin personally. The Wall Street Journal also falsely claimed that Shokin was involved in Burisma's corrupt dealings with a London court. Again, the opposite is true. Shokin wasn't there when all that happened. He was brought in after it happened to clean up. So no wonder that the media has decided not to report on the fact that the House Oversight Committee is now being obstructed by Biden about his speech. But even if people had heard about Biden's obstruction, most people would not know why it's so important to get a draft copy of a speech from 2015. In fact, even conservative media seems oblivious to the significance of the news. We could only find 3 outlets that talked about Biden obstructing the release of his draft speech, and they too did not really get to the heart of the matter. Let's look in more detail at why it's so important to see Biden's draft speech. First off, as already mentioned, the interagency, which denotes consensus meetings and decisions made by various U.S. government agencies, well, the interagency decided on September 30th, 2015, that Ukraine had done enough on the various tasks which the U.S. government had set them to deserve the loan guarantee. The interagency also noted that the guarantee was urgently needed before the end of the year. That means to say before the end of 2015. There was no mention of firing Prosecutor Shokin, nor was this somehow a condition for the loan. Okay, so you might say that was on September 30th. Maybe U.S. government policy changed. Well, we have a copy of the U.S. government interagency document from November 5th, 2015, which pertains to the loan guarantee. And this document makes it very clear that U.S. government policy on the prosecutor and on the loan guarantee had not changed. In fact, there's only one section about the prosecutor's office which talks in general terms about the Ukrainians adopting an inspector general system. Yet on November 22nd, a mere 2 weeks after the interagency once again confirmed that the loan guarantee was going forward and when there were no demands to fire Shokin, well, 2 weeks later, Joe Biden suddenly decided that Shokin had to be fired. We know this from a little notice talking points sheet which was released as part of a trove of documents that formed Trump's Ukraine indictment back in January of 2020. So on November 22nd, 2015, Joe Biden's office issued a demand directed at Ukraine's president that Shokin needed to be fired. But those talking points were not public. They pertained to what Biden told Ukraine's president, Petro Poroshenko, in private. We only found out about this in 2020. But it gets even worse. A few days before Biden gave his Ukraine speech in 2015, for which he's now hiding the original version, there was a White House conference that discussed Biden's trip to Ukraine. Incredibly, Blue Star Strategies, the DC fixers which Hunter Biden and Burisma had hired to help Burisma's problems go away, were on that conference call. That bears repeating. A private group of lobbyists working on behalf of a corrupt Ukrainian energy company participated in a White House conference call to discuss details of Joe Biden's visit to Ukraine. A visit where, a few days later, Joe Biden would, for the first time ever, demand the firing of the prosecutor who was investigating Blue Star's client, Burisma. Later, after Biden got Prosecutor Shokin fired, Blue Star's top representatives immediately flew to Ukraine to lobby Shokin's successor. And we mean on the same day, kind of immediately. The mere fact that Blue Star was on this call, and presumably on many other White House calls, is a scandal that no one has even started to investigate. So, in 2015, a few days after the White House call with Blue Star, Biden was in Ukraine giving a speech that suddenly mentioned changes in the Prosecutor General's office, something that had never been demanded before. And now, in 2024, Biden is fighting to conceal earlier versions of that speech. And let's not forget how this shift to firing a prosecutor and leveraging the loan guarantee started in the first place. One of the most incredible facts about this entire saga is that a few weeks before Biden suddenly changed U.S. government policy on Shokin, the head of Burisma's board, a man called Vadim Pojarsky, specifically demanded from Hunter Biden that the investigations into Burisma be ended. Conspicuously, Pojarsky knew about upcoming trips that high-level U.S. officials and policymakers were going to make to Ukraine, and he wanted Hunter to ensure that the trips be used to end the Burisma investigations. In his email, Pojarsky talks about influential U.S. policymakers. Did he mean Biden? That's difficult to know. However, Biden was effectively Viceroy of Ukraine during that time, telling Ukraine in great detail what to do and what not to do. Biden decided policy, and whether Pojarsky meant Joe Biden specifically or whether he meant one of Biden's people doesn't really matter, because we know the end result. Within a month of Burisma issuing its demands to Hunter Biden, Joe Biden flew to Ukraine and did exactly what Vadim Pojarsky, in the name of Burisma, had demanded from Hunter. The media claims that this was just a coincidence because Biden wasn't doing it for Burisma, but rather to affect U.S. government policy. But as we have seen, and as a long trail of documentary evidence proves, it was not U.S. government policy. It was Biden family policy. And so to come back to where we started today's show, it would be hugely significant if it turns out that the speech which Biden gave in Ukraine originally did not include the part about Prosecutor Shokin being fired. That's what this is all about, and presumably that is why Biden is fighting so hard to keep the original version hidden. One last word here on the House Oversight Committee. It is absolutely within their rights to obtain those drafts. Biden's speech was a formal U.S. government activity. It was 100% official and thus absolutely reviewable by Congress. Republican House members are now threatening that if the original drafts of the speech are not turned over, they will consider the use of compulsory process. That is pretty weak, but let's not get distracted by it. If Biden does not hand over these drafts, this should be taken to mean adverse inference. Adverse inference is a criminal law principle that holds if someone does not hand over evidence, we have to assume that that evidence is not supportive of their cause. The ball is in Biden's court, and we'll keep a close eye on what happens next. Thanks for joining us in today's episode of Truth Over News.